Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining the second WM Santa Pac sponsored virtual panel presentation. I'm Karen Jones, your moderator. Our topic today is on healthcare waste and regulatory compliance challenges. Should you have any questions for our presenters, please put who the question is for and place them in the chat. All questions will be addressed either during the last 15 minutes of the presentation or through email response. Let me introduce our first speaker, Mike Spicer, Operations Support Manager, Certified Hazardous Materials Manager, Certified Healthcare Environmental Manager, and with WM Sustainability Services. Mike has 25 years of experience managing all waste streams for many hospitals and health systems over the years. Mike lives and works in California and has firsthand knowledge of regulatory compliance, integrated waste management practices, and finding customized waste solutions specific to the healthcare facilities he works with. Mike?
Thank you, Karen. Welcome, everyone. So understanding the processing for each of a hospital's waste stream is very important. Do you know where your waste goes? If you know how and where it's processed, you'll have a better time understanding why it's accepted and what is accepted. If your staff are able to explain, why am I doing this? It'll help everyone to make the right choice and proper disposal practices. Next slide, please. As most of you know, recycling and organics diversion is required for virtually all California businesses. AB 341 went into effect in 2012. So the recycling, that's the recycling mandate, and all of you should, have a program in place by now. More recently, SB 1383 went into effect in January of 22. So this is organics for all residents and businesses, and this includes hospitals. The diversion goal is a 75% diversion by 2025. Enforcement just began at the beginning of this year in January. So if your hospital has not been cited, you either have a program in place or the inspector has not gotten to you yet. The best way to have a successful program is really knowing what's accepted at your recycling or organics facility, and then knowing that will really help determine how to develop your individual program. Next slide. So recycling, this is processed at what's called a MRF, material recovery facility. Most of the programs accept clean paper, which is colored white paper, magazines, catalogs. Rigid plastics are also typically accepted. Metal containers like aluminum and tin, and then boxboard packaging, which is like glove boxes and tissue boxes, sometimes juice boxes, milk cartons, and then clean cardboard that's going to be probably a majority of your waste stream, at least half, and sometimes glass is also accepted. Next slide. So recycling in a MRF really depends on what material they take. And the ability to sell this material is really going to be the biggest factor of what's accepted at that individual MRF. Buyers want clean material, so this has to be a very clean waste stream. And the market has really changed over the years quite a bit. Used to be everything went to China. Now other markets have opened to accept materials when China decided that they didn't want so much material and they wanted it to be extra clean. Usually plastics, there's plastics number 1 through number 7, and plastics number 1 and 2 are generally accepted at most MRFs, but they're not always, the other type of plastics are not always acceptable because there's not a market for it. So really, it's a changing kind of a dynamic system, and it changes from time to time. So really, what could be financially viable right now might not be next year in a few months. So knowing your facility and being in contact with them to know what's recyclable and what's not for sure is really the best way to go. The cleaner the material, the better, and that's cost savings is usually passed on to the customer. Next slide, please. Not all MRFs are built the same. Some of them can take soft plastic, some can't. Some can take glass, some can't. And it really depends on the type of sorting machinery that they have. There's a wide range of sorting machinery. Usually about 50% of the facility will be sorted by machines. The rest are sorted by hand. So when people are involved, it can be very costly. Workers' comp, especially in California, can be an issue. It's a dirty job. Not it's not very desirable. So keeping good people can be a challenge. One thing that MRFs do not want is contamination. The reason is somebody could get injured, um, or it's just going to make the loads unacceptable for shipping. If there's a needle stick or an exposure to an infectious waste, this will stop the whole facility in its tracks. And these risks could really be real or perceived. If it looks like medical waste, they could shut down the line. So, at the end of the day, time is money, and making sure that what goes into the MRF, especially from a hospital, is very clean. The best way to collect good recycling is to have a top-down support structure in a hospital. And top-down means that the staff are hearing from leadership. If they hear, this is the program that we're focusing on, our goal is to increase diversion by X amount, in this amount of time. That's the kind of stuff that the staff are going to get on board with. And basically, if your boss wants it, you're going to want it too. Next slide. Yeah, so more and more recycling facilities or MRFs, they're becoming more and more automated. So I want to share this short video on kind of some of the modern things, technologies that you'll see in a modern MRF.
You want a straightforward path to your goals.
Right after this
The
brief
real world
commercial.
has other plans. But with Merrill, the bull has your back, and you get a new perspective on your whole financial life.
We're not affiliated, by the way.
The Waste Management Company is making large investments in upgrading its recycling plants, like this one outside of Cleveland.
Our 100,000 square foot facility is built to manage 12,000 tons a month of recycling.
These investments are helping plants to increase recycling recovery rates, and the company expects the new tech to add $240 million to its bottom line over the next 4 years.
The WM Cleveland facility prior was a commercial recycling plant, so we could not offer single stream commercial recycling. This investment now has opened up our capacity to both residential and commercial recycling. We're able to provide single stream recycling for them.
One of WM's upgrades involves automating its recycling plants with optical sorters powered by AI.
So behind me is one of 12 optical scanners within our process system. The optical scanners are made to pick 900 to 1,000 picks per minute. Through programming and imaging, it identifies a specific product, and there's an air jet that then identifies that product onto a conveyor over to the baler to be baled for the end user.
It makes the sorting go a lot faster. It removes human error. And what they found is that it really boosts not only the quantity of what they call recovered materials, but they're getting a better quality. It's cleaner. It's not a jumble of other stuff in there. So they're spending a lot of money to automate these recycling facilities in order to boost efficiency.
Where we have made these investments, we're lowering our operating costs by reducing some of the labor intensity of the business.
All that stuff goes to these facilities where it's sorted into different materials, mixed paper, corrugated cardboard, clear bottles. That all gets separated. That's a very intense labor, not a very pleasant job. These companies have a really hard time keeping people in those jobs.
And these optical sorters have already...
Great. So sorry if it was a little choppy. I think with a lot of people on the call, it might have affected it. But anyway, so that's kind of a glimpse of what a modern MRF looks like using AI and all that. It's pretty advanced. So very few MRFs actually accept soft plastics, and a soft plastic's going to be basically any kind of like bag or anything that doesn't hold its shape like a container, like a drink container or something like that would. And the reason is because they get wound around machinery. A lot of this machinery, like this is called a star screen. It actually sorts kind of big flat pieces of paper and cardboard and that kind of stuff, pulls it up the line, and the rest of the stuff kind of stays down. So it's really good at sorting. However, if there's anything that can get wound around there, it's a problem. So soft plastics, not much of a market for them anyway. But these can be a big problem and shut down the line as well. They have to, you know, turn everything off and cut all this stuff out of here. It can take a lot of hours. So really, that's challenging for a hospital because hospitals need to use liners pretty much for everything. So so the best practice is really to use the liners on your recycling bins and then remove the liners from all the recycling. And this will really help to keep your containers clean and also keep the facility from accepting your from rejecting your stuff. Next slide, please. So organics, typically organics are defined as food scraps, food soil paper, plant debris, untreated wood. Also cardboard and recycled paper they fall into the organics category. However, a better option is typically going to be in the mixed recycling program because it can actually have a second life as opposed to going to compost. And really the method of processing is going to dictate what items are accepted and what program that you can do. Next slide, please. So a couple options. Vermiculture is an option where worms eat the material and they turn it into a compost. Also animal feed, the food feeds the animal, which is great. And then there's typically fertilizer as a result. The problem with these is worms can't take larger bones, paper, wood products, and same thing with animals. They can't take any of that stuff either. And also farmers don't want post-consumer food. So so plate scrapings and that kind of stuff is just not something that they want coming in contact with their animals. And also these programs are not available everywhere. So if it's an option for you, it could be a good option, but it's not going to solve all of your organic needs. And any kind of contaminants are really intolerable. So if you have post-consumer composting, it's just not for this program. Next slide. What a widely used program is going to be like a composting facility, which is an aerobic process. There's very little to no methane produced. And this breaks down the food and plant waste. It's pretty much, a lot of things are accepted, like, pre and post consumer foods, plant material, floral, wood, paper, bones, all that kind of stuff is pretty much accepted. And they're a little more tolerable, to contaminants, like if there's nails in a pallet or something, like broken pallet or something like that. Digester is another option, which is an anaerobic process, and this generates methane for fuel. The fuel is captured and sold, and it can power, pretty much anything that like a natural gas type product would power. Most of the acceptance is the same as a compost facility, and the end product is going to be compost at the end of the day, and the fuel. Next slide. A lot of hospitals want to use a compostable product for flatware. It sounds like a great idea. The problem is it takes longer to break down than most of these facilities take to break down their waste. So a composting facility typically takes about 30 days. This type of flatware says it takes 90 days. Sometimes it takes longer. It's really in ideal conditions. So for the most part, these products are not acceptable in a composting program. The best option is to use, real China or something like that, so you actually don't generate the waste at all. I know there's drawbacks to that and challenges with staffing and what have you to wash that stuff, but yeah, really just a natural product, like a paper that breaks down very easily is about all that they can take in these programs. But where you put your collection containers for organics is going to depend on what program you're using. Like for instance, if you have a collection container in a cafeteria, you're not going to be able to use an animal feed program for that material because it's going to be post-consumer. So really that's going to be more for like a back of the house collection, cuttings and that kind of stuff. Next slide. So landfills. Landfills have restrictions just like hospitals do, and how they manage the waste. So they can be fined and have problems with regulators. So hospital waste is heavily scrutinized as a result, because they can't have the wrong stuff get into the landfill. Next slide. Hazardous waste, medical waste, radioactive waste. These are all things that would be flagged as a non-conforming waste. And most of the like medical and hazardous waste would be visually flagged, whereas radioactive waste would be something that they might have sensors for and detect radioactive waste. If they do detect any of this stuff, sometimes the entire load can be rejected and sent back to you. That's a problem because hospitals, now have to figure out how do I get rid of the contents of this compactor, or how do I get the items out of the compactor once they're in there. So the best thing is to be very proactive with landfills and MRFs, and ask them, hey, can you send me pictures if you get anything that doesn't belong? We don't expect it to happen, but if it does, here's the number to call. Send us pictures. Let us give us an opportunity to come pick that stuff up, or have a waste vendor come in and pick it up for us. That's the best way to go. Have a plan in place. Next slide. So landfills, don't they just bury this stuff? They do. However, it's a very organized process. They have, the landfills of today are it's a more scientific process where they actually have cells where they can, they call cells where they dig up a specific area and they have it mapped out exactly how many loads went there and where they came from and the dates and all that kind of stuff. So they can pinpoint where the waste was buried. They use synthetic and natural liners, and they use different kinds of ground cover to temporarily cover waste before it's actually permanently buried. And this makes it so that there's not as much spread of material. Leachate and methane gas can also be recovered, and the methane can be used to power the plant and sometimes other things like trucks and that kind of stuff. But it's important to remember that regulators can fine, and they usually go back to the generator. So hospitals have to really be careful of that. Next slide. Medical waste is going to be your biohazard and bloody, potentially infectious materials, cell cultures, sharps. These are all things that typically go to a facility where they're steam sterilized or autoclaved. And it's important to remember that all the stuff that ends up going through this process will end up in a landfill. So anything you're putting in here does not get burned in the red bag, or the sharps container. It actually does get into the landfill eventually. So PHI and other things, hazardous waste and that kind of stuff is it's still going to be a problem for you. So make sure that it's just medical waste that's going in there. Next slide. Another option is to treat your medical waste on site, and there's an on-site autoclave process, just like off-site, but it's a smaller version where it turns the medical waste into treated medical waste, and it's usually priced similar to trash once it goes off-site. So just one thing to remember, that not all landfills accept treated medical waste, so you have to make sure that the landfill that you're using will accept it, and at what price. Next slide. Incineration waste is going to be pretty much all the other medical waste that doesn't go through the autoclave process, and that's going to be your non-haz pharmaceutical waste, pathological waste, trace chemotherapeutic waste. All this stuff does get burned. Typically, that's the mainstream way to do it. And it's not burned in California because California says, not in my backyard. Take it elsewhere. The same thing with RCRA hazardous waste. It's going to go through an incineration process to a RCRA permitted facility. Next slide. So waste audits. This is really the best way to see what's going on in your departments, in your hospital. The pictures are the most effective way to give feedback and training to your staff. You can see which department is a problem or which one needs education. Sometimes with a picture, the nursing staff can pinpoint and say, I know exactly who did that, and they can affect change and solve the problem. So that's a great way to do it, and it's going to be dependent on the shift and times of day and that kind of stuff. So it's a great way. I highly encourage you to do audits on a regular basis. So really the combination of knowing where your waste goes, what's accepted, and using pictures of audits for training and feedback of staff, that's really going to be the best way to help your programs thrive and maximize your compliance and diversion. Thank you for your time. Turn it back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Mike. Our second speaker, Matt Hooray, has 17 years of experience in environmental health and safety and is a principal consultant at Kaiser Permanente's National Environmental Health and Safety Department. In his role as a National Environmental Health and Safety Principal, Matt collaborates with enterprise stakeholders to provide subject matter expertise and support for the internal EH&S audit, regulatory tracking, industrial hygiene, hazardous materials, and waste management programs. He is a certified safety professional, certified hazardous materials manager, and certified healthcare environmental manager. Matt?
Hey, thanks, Karen, and thanks, Mike. So just wanted to jump into this. I think Mike gave a great update and presentation on, how the landfill side of this works, and really here to talk more about strategies to improve the challenges that we have in healthcare regarding waste management, and working with our frontline staff, our nursing and clinical providers on this. As we all know, a majority of our providers do have multiple priorities. They are juggling a number of complex decision-making tasks at one time. We have a number of regulatory compliance requirements that we need to deal with. And also, we have an increased use of disposable materials today in healthcare. So all of these different factors, I think, really drive a lot of actions that need to happen by our staff. And many of them did not go to nursing school or to medical school to become waste managers while providing patient care. Their goal is to take care of the patient and give the patient the services they need to recover from whatever illness that they are going through or experiencing at that moment. And so as we talk about this, I think a lot of the times that we look at waste is just being another factor, and we know the waste kind of goes and it goes out of sight, out of mind sometimes at the end of the day, but there are some key strategies that we can utilize to improve performance around waste management for our frontline staff so that we are doing the right things. And so one of them is to make it easier to properly segregate and dispose of waste. And then another is to enhance waste collection and identify other innovative opportunities around waste management. Use sourcing processes to address waste challenges to see if we can find less toxic or non-hazardous products that can be disposed of as regular trash. And lastly, having simplified compliance processes, as Mike talked a little bit about waste audits. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So one of, I think, the most clear-cut ways that we can work with our operations to streamline waste management is to implement what we call waste bin optimization. And this really is around going out and looking at where waste containers are placed in your facility, looking at the opportunity as to how waste container can be removed from certain areas or brought together into one area where staff can actually go to that spot and make the decision to properly dispose of the materials that they have. I think what we know that there are much opportunities down hospital corridors and elevator lobbies and nurses stations and other areas to create waste stations and bring all of the containers to one point for people to have the right decision making versus one container being on one side of the room and another one on the other side. You know, people are not necessarily going to make that trip across the room to dispose of something in the other container if they have a container closer to them. So, and I think the other area would be is to look at ambulance bays and see what's coming in from those outside ambulance drivers and things like that, and optimizing how they may dispose of anything that come off of their rigs in the emergency department. So those are some of the main areas where you can look at how to optimize waste bin optimization and create waste stations. And the next step would be to go out and to walk your facility and actually look at where there's unnecessary bins and see what you can do to remove those, specifically around the regular trash bins. Sometimes there may be more regular trash bins placed for convenience and close proximity. And sometimes those can be eliminated, and that a lot of that can happen through communication with staff and other frontline workers. Next thing would be to choose lids to help influence behaviors. The more we look at the waste containers that are placed and how they're placed, and generally when you have an open top container that doesn't have a lid or have some sort of restricted access, it's easier for contents to end up into that container. And then utilization of standardized labels and colors on your waste bins that are placed in your facility. So all of these different things, I think, come together and help you have a better operational system for how your waste is managed overall. Next slide. And so when you think about like where waste containers are placed, there's a couple of example photos here. And sometimes, depending on where you go, you'll see hospital corridors where there are waste containers out in the corridors, and they're placed in certain areas where people are maybe leaving an area, like a conference room or something like that, or they're leaving maybe a suite or something like that. And you don't necessarily need to have waste containers in all those areas. It's more about thinking, what is the purpose of this container and what's going to be going in here? And if somebody has to carry it a little bit farther down the hallway to where you can adequately place a waste station, can that be better served? I think the benefits to that are, right, is it keeps your corridors clear and wide open, but it also brings people to one spot, and it also allows for EVS to go to specific places to maintain those waste stream volumes in the containers. The next picture I have here on the upper right corner, this is an example of two containers that are brought together in a strategic location for disposal. And one of the things I would just like to kind of point out is that one container has a lid that's activated by a foot pedal. The other container does not. And sometimes, like, maybe it does make sense to have that open top container. And other times you may not want to have an open top container because it just may be easier for somebody to walk by and throw something into the open top container versus having to stop and depress the foot pedal and open the lid to throw out what goes in there. I think as containers are placed and looking at the engineering design behind the container is important to ensure that the right things are going to go into the right container as you want. This next picture down here in the lower left corner shows two containers that are strategically placed. And I think, we have one container that is the red one there that's placed right at the immediate patient care area where we're known to be generating potentially infectious materials so that staff can immediately access that container and dispose of it. Then you have the solid waste container, which is out by the doorway there, where it's more likely that they would be disposing of solid waste containers. And so these containers are placed intentionally like this by design. And I think it's important as we all in healthcare look at waste containers in our facility design that we incorporate waste container placement and design. Sometimes it's an afterthought. And I think, this is something that we've been learning more in California, that there are ways to engineer in better workflows around how waste is managed and handled as a component of design. And the last picture here in the bottom left shows a waste station. And this is in a public area where you have a solid waste container and also an opportunity for the general public to dispose of any paper. And I think it's ideal to try to keep consistent practices in place with what you're expecting the public to do and the staff to do with if you're recycling all paper and things like that, using the same waste stream processes, because this will allow and ensure that all of these items end up into the right containers and get out the door with the right vendor at the end of the day. Next slide. And so one of the ways to support where you place all of your waste bins is to do waste mapping. And this is really, I think, makes it easier for all staff and vendors to know where the bins are, helps the departments understand their workflows and placement. It helps to ensure that the EVS or other vendors that are providing waste management services know where the containers are and where the storage areas are to get the waste to the right places. And lastly, it helps to prevent program drift. So as you have, EVS supervisors or department managers and things like that that are managing the waste bin placements and they know where they are. And if waste containers start to move or waste containers get added, sometimes there's changes with certain staff and they say, well, gee, we should bring back in all these desk side containers and things like that. It allows for somebody else to pick up a waste stream map and kind of understand, okay, hey, this is what we have agreed upon in terms of how the waste workflows and what do we need to change, and kind of keep that continuity going in the institutional knowledge for the waste collection processes when it's documented. And you can make a physical plot map and you can use different symbols to identify where your containers go, or you could create an Excel table and kind of document what types of containers you have and what the room numbers are and so forth. So there's different ways to create your mapping of your waste container placement. And with the new generator improvement rules for hazardous waste, most facilities now are required to document where all of your hazardous waste containers are placed in your facility. So kind of combining that activity into your other regulated waste and solid waste container placements may help with overall operational efficiencies around how your containers are utilized. Next slide. The next thing would be is to really standardize how you communicate out what the expectations are for the contents of disposal in each bin. And I can't emphasize enough, I've been with Kaiser Permanente for 17 years, but I did work for other health systems prior to coming to Kaiser, and seeing the variations of the different types of communication tools that are used for waste matrices and other documents and things like that. And even when a system has more than one hospital, if there's variation in the design, sometimes it leads to confusion for those staff that work across multiple sites. So the opportunity is to really standardize the template and have all the sites use the same template. So that way people are looking for the same type of sign and they know what goes in that container. Not every building may have the exact same color bins in place for every waste stream and things like that. So there may be some variation that way, but it's a lot easier to standardize the communication tools that are used for the bins to get better staff awareness and that visual cue for understanding what goes in what container. We'll go to the next slide. So another thing that we've done is we have worked to standardize the labels across our enterprise. And we've partnered with an organization called Recycle Across America. And Recycle Across America is also partnering with other organizations like the National Park Service. I think they've partnered with major airports, Walmarts, other local municipal counties, gas stations, and so forth. So the whole concept is to standardize the types of labels that are used across society. So if any of us go anywhere, we see a certain type of label and we go, oh, okay, I know what goes in this container. And we're more likely to do the right thing with what we're trying to dispose of. And it's really key because our staff members will see these consistent labelings across all of our buildings. And so there's a link included on here if you want to learn more about Recycle Across America. And they do quite a bit of work to work with you to customize labels and help talk about waste stations and also, different container options as well. So next slide. So as Mike was talking earlier about knowing where your waste is going and, kind of connecting the dot on that with, we have a waste stream map in our facility, and we know where our wastes are being collected and how they're being collected and they're being brought down, and making sure that we're connecting to our storage areas, where our dumpsters and compactors, and having the consistency to make sure that those areas are consistently labeled with the point of collection containers. So by adding labels to your dumpsters, will help if you need to paint, if you can get your vendor to paint the colors of the dumpsters to help out with making that connection as well. So those are some key opportunities. The next thing would be to add security to your dumpsters to avoid contamination by unauthorized persons. And this could be, you may have vendors that come on site and perform services and so forth, and they may just pick a dumpster and throw anything into it. And really, if you do have the opportunity to lock up your dumpsters or put other security barriers and measures in place, or administrative controls where they have to get an EVS employee or a building engineer before placing something in a dumpster, can help to provide contamination by unauthorized persons in your dumpsters. And I think, as Mike mentioned, adding stickers to your recycling containers, so no plastic bags, as a reminder, so that the EVS operations can empty those bags out. That does gum up their equipment. And it also results in contamination fees and charges back to the site by the vendor. So, next slide, please. So another thing that we put in place in Kaiser is to collect all paper. And this is any type of paper that's generated. It could be patient information related paper. It could be basic office paper notes and things like that. But all types of paper are collected as confidential waste and sent for shredding. And this is, kind of works toward meeting our recycling goal and requirement in California. It makes decision making easier for our staff so that they're not having to decide, well, I've got a piece of paper here, and do I get this piece of paper into the confidential waste bin, or does this go into a single stream recycling bin? And the other advantage is of we're keeping the paper out of the single stream recycling container. It keeps that plastic waste cleaner. So, and it reduces the volume that EVS needs to manage of that single stream recycling, where it's more focused on cans and bottles for that collection, and all of the paper is managed through the confidential waste vendor program. So next slide. So another thing that we have leveraged is utilization of on-site medical waste treatment technology. And there's several benefits to this when it's feasible for a site to use this technology and put it into place. And the first one is I want to get my notes up. Provides us with resiliency to manage our waste based on operational needs. So we size our on-site treatment technology to be able to manage all of our red bag waste volume for our core EVS operating hours, allowing for that non-operating shift to be available for surge capacities and flu season and things like that. So we do have that extra capacity to manage our waste and have that resiliency. And we've seen that benefit be very valuable to us in the last few years. It's also, I think it's not necessarily a replacement for vendor services, it's a supplement. So for sites that use a vendor for their red bag waste services, this would not entirely replace them, but it does become supplemental in that regards. It's integrated with our solid waste compactor, so we're able to manage all of our treated medical waste and solid waste in one compactor. And it's, we send that waste off to the landfill. So with permission, we have a profile with the landfill on hand, and it's direct hauled off to the landfill. And the other benefit is that we are able to load validate the treatment of each cycle of that medical waste before it does go into the compactor. And it also helps with our air emissions reduction goals for the scope 1, 2, and 3 reporting requirements in the state of California. because the waste now is only transported one time instead of being transported twice for final disposal. So those are key benefits that we have seen, but some of the other benefits behind on-site treatment technology is it gives us additional bandwidth with looking at our operations and how we are collecting medical waste in certain key areas, particularly around the waste container placement program. In those areas where we are tight on space and we have a solid waste container and we have a red bag waste container, and it's becomes a competition on what is being generated in which bag, the clear bag or the red bag up in the room. Sometimes we're able to move to utilizing the red bag waste container instead of having two containers in that room, and staff are only having to make one decision at that point, and then that waste can be brought down, managed in the Sanapac unit or other autoclave unit, and then sent to the landfill directly that way, and it gets treated if there is any medical waste. So I think that's one thing to think about in terms of on-site treatment medical waste technologies is it does give you that other flexibility in regards to certain high-risk departments where there is more medical waste generated based on the patient care function than there would be in other non-intensive patient care areas. Next slide, please. Some other improvement opportunities are around the management of universal waste. There are several opportunities out there with various vendors that provide mailback programs. And these are really convenient because you're able to place the mailback universal waste containers into soiled utility rooms. These containers generally consist of a plastic bucket that come with a DOT approved lid. And so staff are able to collect the contents of whether it's aerosol cans, batteries, lamps, small electronics, and these devices into these containers. And all somebody has to do is seal up the lid of the pail, and it can be taken down to materials management department and shipped off site back to the recycling vendor. And so that reduces a need for having to find a place to store it on site. It allows you to have a more proactive management program in place in terms of managing oversight of these containers as they fill up. They're able to be easily swapped out and managed. Next slide. Some other sourcing opportunities is to look at where you can have product substitution. And one of the lessons that we've learned is the hard wall canister wipes for hand wipe sanitizers do have free flowing liquid in the bottom of them, and those do require disposal as hazardous waste. Whereas working to substitute those out with the foil packet ones that lay horizontally do not have residual liquid in the bottom. So those foil packets then could be thrown out, provided there's no free-flowing liquid in the bottom of them. The next one is ethyl chloride. Look at this, and this has glass bottles. So these bottles typically will have residual liquid in the bottom of them, so they don't meet the California definition of empty. But there are other alternative similar products out there that come in aerosol form, and these can meet the definition of being California empty, or these can be managed as universal waste. So you have alternative management methods by using product substitution. And there's other products out there as well that can be evaluated, and there may be other safer alternatives. Next slide. So I think compliance, who really owns waste management compliance? And this is really around everybody. And I think it's crucial to look at how processes are implemented that drive staff ownership and having staff informed on what is working and what's not working, but engaging staff on the waste container placement, locations, and creating waste stations. I think as the communication happens and they're involved in it, you're more likely to have staff buy-in and success. Standardizing simple checklists that have no more than 10 items, but are straightforward. So if you're going to create a simple checklist that are going to be used by staff and others to round the department and maintain the containers and check for any type of program drift or identify process changes and things that need to be figured out regarding disposal of certain key items, these tools will allow staff to manage that process and work with EVS operations and other senior leaders. And I think developing waste management training overall for staff that is consistent with your frontline EVS staff, your clinical staff. Everybody is trained on the same information so that there is no variation of expectations around how waste is managed, but also including a basic competency of certain same questions that everybody answers as well through that process. Next slide. I think in summary, the key message here is the opportunity to reduce waste management decision making, and that is by eliminating unnecessary containers, consolidating waste stream collection where feasible and practical. And so that can mean bringing together waste containers, creating a waste station, looking at opportunities where maybe certain types of waste that can be commingled compliantly into the same container and manage that way make the most sense. Standardize your program information so that everybody is using the same tools and resources. If you have multiple sites, identify problematic items and look for product substitutions. As I mentioned with the sanitation wipes. Implement equipment to achieve waste management goals, and that might be on-site treatment systems for medical waste. That could be, using different types of compactors to collect certain types of recycling streams in a dedicated way. You may want to have an organic compactor, a cardboard compactor, and a solid waste compactor. So there's other ways that you can use equipment and technology to manage your waste streams, so that way that it's offered correctly to your waste hauler. And then engage frontline staff. I think to have a successful program, they need to be a component of it as well. I think we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, we do have a few questions. The first question is for Mike. Mike, what has been your experience with best practices on removing the trash liners before they go into the compactors or front load containers?
Yeah, so I work directly with hospitals on these type of things, and I try to set up the process so that it works with their existing workflow. So for instance, if they're using a tipper for their recyclable material, when they pull the bag out of the recycling, sometimes that same employee takes it to a transporting cart, and emptying the contents into that cart at that time is probably the best way to do it. And then remove the liner, to the trash. If they're not using a tipper, they may have to collect it in bags, and then when they get to the compactor or the outside bin, they have to then remove it from the liner. Sometimes, I've seen them untie the bags, and I've also seen them cut the bags with like a box cutter. So really just depends on your process.
Thanks, Mike.
This question, what's the biggest waste challenge for hospitals today?
I think it's it's having to manage several waste streams. Clinical providers having to make clinical decisions at the same time of having to manage several different regulated items. And where it's feasible, the ability to consolidate those waste streams as much as possible. So if you're able to do commingled sharps and farm, if a red bag makes more sense in a particular procedure room rather than having a red bag in a solid waste container, those kind of things, really engineering the waste stream collection process so that the least amount of decisions have to be made to maintain compliance of the waste streams collected.
Thank you.
This question is for Matt. Do you have recommendations on how staff should be trained? Is this in huddles during new employee orientation? What's your thoughts?
I think there's a couple of different ways to approach this. It does work to have huddle training with staff where they are, have refreshers on their department specific wastes and what they should be doing with those wastes. but it also makes sense to have a focused training that goes out to everybody on an annual basis, because there may be certain people that don't work day to day in clinical operations and may not have that, get those refreshers you would get in a huddle training and have that hands-on experience. So I think it's a combination method really of training everybody at least annually if you can, and then doing some more periodic refreshers through either a huddle or showing different flyers and posters and things like that.
This question is for Mike. Mike, how can one arrange for a tour to a local MRF?
Yeah, so it depends on where you're sending your waste. So that's the first thing to find out. But yeah, most MRFs are pretty open to a tour. It's just a matter of contacting them. If you have a local rep that you're dealing with, that's one way to do it. I usually the hospitals that I work with, I set them up for them and schedule it. But yeah, it just depends on where you're taking it to. One red flag would be if the MRF doesn't want you to come for some reason. That means they're probably not doing what they say they're doing with your material. So that'd be a good check to see whether or not they're truly recycling your material.
Thank you.
This question is for both Mike and Matt. Are you aware of any alternatives to landfill for treated medical waste within California that are currently available or coming online in the near future? The last incinerator in California is closing end of this month. Would like to avoid landfill, but have not found a viable alternative.
Yeah, that's a challenge. The problem is yeah, California does not want incineration in the state, and there used to be waste to energy as an option with the Covanta sites, and those have also closed. So yeah, it's tough. I don't know that there's a good alternative. Matt, did you have any alternatives that you've looked into or know about?
No, we've not seen any alternatives that would be able to manage a large volume of treated medical waste like an incinerator or waste energy plant would, to my knowledge at this point. Doesn't mean that we're not, keeping our eyes open to see what additional technology does come down the pipeline.
Absolutely. It's a great question.
One more question for Mike. Did you say methane can be captured from all of your landfills?
I wouldn't say, I probably don't, I'm not the right person to ask about how many landfills do collect all the methane, but I know a majority of I think there's, I want to say like 260 something waste management landfills, and I believe the majority of them do capture methane. And some were designed, newer landfills are designed to more efficiently capture that methane. And so that's actually a pretty, especially when materials become scarce or the price of things go up, of natural gas goes up, what have you. That's when that's what usually sparks these type of programs, investing in these type of programs. So over the last 10 years or so, that they've really ramped up that process. I don't know the number per se, but I know it's probably majority of them are capturing.
Thank you.
And the last question is for Matt. On your operational waste mapping slide, how often do you audit this program to maintain consistency?
So our local operations look at this, and they look at the container placement. And so I know now with the new general hazardous waste improvement rules, our sites will need to be looking at this at least annually before their hazardous waste inspections. But I do know that our hospitals do pay close attention to this, and our EVS supervisors do work closely with our frontline staff regarding what waste containers they're using and where they're placed. So I don't have a specific answer on what site and their frequency, but it is something that people do look at through different types of rounding processes.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending today, and any questions that were not answered and you put into the chat room will in fact be sent to you via email. Have a wonderful day, and again, thank you for joining our call today.
Thank you.